It's viewed as a huge negative in terms of evaluating your fund for possible investment. So they're looking for a much more formal, institutionalized structure within the firm. There's a guy I know works out of his house, in his garage attached to his house, great fund. I said, you'll never get another dime of institutional money unless you move out of your garage. I said, I'm sure it's comfortable, but you really have to create a much more professional environment for people to want to invest in your fund. Because I'm sure, although you can do laundry while you trade, that's not really going to be an attractive option from an institutional perspective. Right? It's just not. And the people you have around you is critical because you need to demonstrate that some sort of continuity plan in your organization. That if you go away or some sort of formal liquidation of the fund, if the manager happens to get hit by a bus or something along those lines. Not that we're wishing that's going to happen, but you need to have those plans in place. So as they come in, they say, well, yeah, you have a plan in place for that. Disaster recovery plan. One guy I was talking to, his backup plan is at his buddy's house in Pennsylvania. I said, that's great, but that's not really going to fly from an institutional perspective. Oh, he's got the discs. I said, so that really, from a formalized structure, that's not really a good disaster recovery plan. Right? Key man insurance, all those things, yes.
What sort of checks do you do, and what sort of procedures do you recommend with regard to confidentiality of client information?
Excuse me, I really have to repeat their question because I don't get it in front of me.
Oh, sure. The question was checks and cross checks as to confidentiality of client information. Now, you mean client information for investors in your fund?
That's correct.
Well, we obviously can't check on your clients. What typically is done is we ask about the manager's past associates or industry contacts within that area. We really don't. It's very difficult for a fund to disclose who their clients are.
No, what I mean is, how do you check to make sure that someone like the guy you're talking about who has an office in his garage doesn't have all of his client information lying around? You can walk in and say, oh,
Well, that's part of
this person's invested.
right. That's part of the IT infrastructure issue. We ask about data and where the data is housed, and to be sure, it should be offsite somewhere. So yeah, that's one of the problems. It's what happens if your house blows up or something else. Do you have the customer data at a secure location offsite, co-located around the U.S.? Most emerging managers don't because they're emerging. Right. So now, there are a lot of web-based platforms where you can upload your stuff and let it sit out there at however many web servers there are. And that's a consideration too, because you need to have these things in place. So IT infrastructure is critical, insurance is critical, process flow is critical, bench in terms of the team is critical. Fund docs, discrepancies between the PPM, subscription docs should be minimized, or better yet, eliminated. Because the lawyer writes the PPM, you've got the subscription docs, and oftentimes things change, and people forget to change the PPM. Also, a clear articulation of strategy. Before, the idea was in the PPM, be as vague as possible. It gives you as much leeway to run as many things as you want. Now, the requirement is that you are much more specific in the way you describe your strategy in the PPM and in the fund and in the subscription documents. You have to be very, very specific because of not just strategy creep, but frankly, just a different strategy completely. Right? Those things have happened. Yes?
Can you elaborate on, since you're going into these areas, the need for or significance of, say, carrying E&O coverage, various forms of E&O coverage, what that would be?
That
An allocator looking at you and considering that.
that in E&O coverage, not so much an important consideration. Key man insurance would be more important, particularly if you are the manager pulling the trigger on the trades. Those kinds of things would be much more important than errors and omissions. even at the fund of funds level, if you are the person running the fund of funds, making the decision as it relates to the managers you select and all that, the CEO of the fund, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think I'm out of time. Any more questions? Thanks.
Thank you, Rainford. That was a great starter. So as we know, getting started in the hedge fund industry is not such an easy task, even though people think it is. Even with a great strategy and an even greater track record, it doesn't ensure that you'll be able to raise the right amount of assets to get to what we like to call critical mass. That's why we've invited our next guest, our next speaker, to speak on seeding and tell us what his firm's doing and how they're taking a look at managers from a quantitative as well as a quantitative as well as a qualitative manner. He comes to us from Aduro Asset Group. His name is Nicholas Brack, and Mr. Brack has over 15 years of experience in investment management, private equity, corporate finance, and he's a current member of the World Affairs Council of the Palm Beaches, which is something I'd like to hear more about later. So let's welcome him. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here, Michael. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. Rainford and I have had many discussions on a lot of what you've just talked about, which is so true, so accurate about what we're finding out there in the capital raising sphere. I think it's important when, first of all, who in here is managing assets in excess of, say, 250 million? Okay. Who's managing assets in excess of 100 million? In excess of 50? So there's a certain level of, is it fair to say then, a certain level of the emerging manager sphere of wanting to grow those assets is represented here tonight, I would imagine. The reason I say that is that, let's be honest, it's difficult, isn't it? Or do you just have people banging down your door to give you dollars? Because if you do, I want to do what you're doing. Really. We could talk after, exchange cards. The reality is that when I first got in, sometimes when I look at, my experience in the hedge fund space, if I would have known the difficulties that I've encountered in, getting it off the ground, building strategic partnerships, both here domestically and in Europe, if, I would have done it all again. Probably. But in all honesty, it's a difficult row to hoe. And I think some of the things that we've done, from my earliest times of capital raising, and now to what we have as a manager of managers platform, we're basically not a fund of funds, but we're not a multi-strat fund. We deal with multiple managers across all spectrums, and we work on from a capacity of separate managed accounts, but more importantly, finding those assets that can be bundled together into an alternative platform that makes sense to the end investor. So instead of early on in my capital raising, I was going out with one single fund saying, here's what we do, here's why you should be involved in what we do. And that's fine. I had run across some European investors who said, this is a great strategy. We don't have anything like this in our jurisdiction, but what else do you have? And I made the mistake potentially of saying, well, what else do you want? And they said, well, let's try and get 5 non-correlating assets with a minimum of a 3-year track record, all audited, and bundle them together into a alternative platform that can be sold to institutions and pension funds in Europe. I said, okay. 2 years later and a couple $1 million, we've built a lot of infrastructure, much of what Rainford's talked about, the important things of positioning yourself to actually take in assets, both from an operational perspective as well as an investment perspective.